Hey everyone, this is Fernando doing another video for Modern Survivalists. In this case, I'm going to be doing a bit of a longer video, taking all the time needed so as to go step by step through each piece of EDC kit and understanding better the possible uses of it, in which cases it may come in handy, and therefore understanding better what is it exactly that you may want to be carrying, the capabilities of each particular object, each particular tool, and therefore getting a better idea of how you may adapt your own kit to your own personal circumstances. And here I'm starting already with a basic setup like any other ordinary person would have. Basically, no one is these days without a wallet, cell phone, and of course their keys. This is pretty much what every single person has on the street, right? Now, already here we're talking about things that have quite a bit of usefulness, not only on daily basis, on daily life, of course, but also in cases of problems, even disasters and emergencies. With your wallet, with a good amount of cash, your credit cards, you can not only buy food, supplies, transportation, pay for a hotel room, get shelter if needed when moving, when out and about. Money is, of course, and we all pretty much understand that it is one of the most handy tools in modern life. You also have your IDs. You know, it goes without saying that money always comes in handy and helps quite a bit, not only on daily life, but also when there's problems as well. I've never done anything like that, but I've been told that in third world countries you can actually bribe your way out of problems. You can actually bribe your way into getting passports that are being denied to other people. I've of course never done anything like that, but I've been told by some guys that it actually works that way. You know, you never know, it may be that way in some places. And once you start thinking of it this way, once you start understanding it, there's going to be little tweaks and differences between what you do and what the average guy does, what the person with the modern survival mindset does and what the average person does. Once you start thinking of it this way, maybe you will start having a little bit extra cash in your wallet. Maybe a few $100 in your wallet. You may be thinking, why would I want to have a couple extra $100 in my wallet? If I lose that, I'm losing a couple $100 when, you know, I'm just fine with my credit card and such. Well, you start understanding these things. You start looking at things that have happened in the past. I'm of course biased towards my experience, which includes an economic collapse in my country, in Argentina, in 2001. And you may be thinking, well, you know, that's just you, man. That's not everyone else. But as of right now, as of this moment, guys, as of right now, people in Cyprus are going through exactly the same thing I went myself. They woke up a couple days ago, Saturday morning, went to the ATMs, found them empty, went to the banks, realized what was going on. They found banks closed, and they just got screwed. That's pretty much what happened. And you know what? They never thought it would happen to them. They never thought they would wake up one day and find their bank accounts frozen, the news that you're going to be taking 10% or 6% of their money being stolen from them, which, you know, in our case it was worse, but it's bad enough as it is. And they never thought they would find themselves in that position. Cash during problems, during economic problems, during natural disasters as well, it buys you stuff. When the grid is down, when there's no power and the plastic money doesn't work anymore, cash is handy. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have, of course, your credit card as well for the things you need. And once you start thinking this way, you start adding different stuff. You may have a few band-aids in there. You may have an alcohol, antiseptic wipe in there as well for cleaning little wounds and such. You start thinking different when you adapt the modern survival mindset. And here you have a compartment for coins. You may be thinking, well, if there's a disaster, if there's an emergency, I won't be using coins for vending machines. Maybe I'll just bust my way into one and get food because I'm desperate. You have to understand also that there's always different shades of gray. Maybe what's happening is bad, but not that bad that would justify the problems involved with looting or breaking into a vending machine when just a couple bucks worth of coins would solve that problem for you. Maybe there's times in which your cell phone isn't working, but the phones on the street are working and you need coins for that, and just breaking into it will not solve anything. You actually need the little coin. So you start thinking this way for everything that it's involved in your life, mentally and physically as well. Your cell phone, extremely valuable tool for communication, and communication is huge. in preparedness and survival, being communicated, knowing what's happening, gathering, especially with smartphones, gathering news. And you have like a ton of apps. You know, you have to do 100 separate videos covering the different possible apps. But you have radio scanners, you have GPS, you have the maps in there, which is fantastic. I mean, there's so much stuff that is it's invaluable. Not only being communicated, but all the possibilities thanks to technology. I started really appreciating. I wasn't that much into cell phones myself a few years ago, and I started carrying my cell phone on a daily basis. Started carrying a cell phone on a daily basis when things started getting very bad in Argentina in terms of security. When crime became big, I understood that we had to keep in touch. We had to stay communicated, so as to know where the other person is, where your wife is, where your kids are, if something is happening to them. We were seeing this happening in Argentina, this thing called virtual kidnappings. If someone got the intel of a person being away on business or something like that, they would call the family and tell them that they had kidnapped that person, especially knowing that you couldn't be communicated with him and see if he was alright. So they would tell you that they kidnapped him, ask for maybe $1,000, $2,000 to be dropped nearby where you live. And you start calling him, you cannot get in touch with him, and your head starts working. You start thinking, well, just maybe a couple $1,000, I'm saving my loved one's life, and you just go there, drop the money, only to realize later on that it was all a scam. And what had actually happened was that he simply could not get hold of you because of where he was going. It also happened with, for example, with kids. I mean, I'm getting into fine little details here where it just to get your head working. There was this case of a teenage kid that had lied to his parents about being somewhere else, and he was going to some other party, and later on going with that girl and spending the night with her. And some people really knew about this, commented to some others, and those guys knew that his parents just would not be able to get hold of that kid because that kid was with this girl, and those parents paid the ransom thinking that their son had been kidnapped when he was just spending the night with some girl. So you see how it all works out. Being communicated is indeed very important. Now, cell phones are still pretty fragile pieces of technology, and I really suggest getting something like this, an OtterBox case, which makes it just impact proof. You can drop this many times as I've done, and it still holds on. You just don't want to be worrying about how fragile your phone is during disasters. Natural disasters, emergencies of any kind. You've been mugged, you've been attacked, you've fall to the floor, hurt yourself, broke your phone. Your phone, every piece of gear that you have, and that we're going to be adding later on, has to be as tough as possible, because that's what you need. When things start getting ugly, that's what you need. When things aren't working your way, that's what's going to be happening. There's the Sony Xperia Z, I believe, which is also waterproof. That would be like winning ticket. I mean, a phone that is waterproof, actually waterproof, and adding a case so as to make it extra tough, that is something to keep in mind and maybe consider too. Everyone has their keys as well, and most people will have something like this, some little fobs or of some sort. I myself think that it's just a waste of time, a waste of space and weights. Again, we start getting into this modern survival mindset where every little detail is going to be analyzed. Every single thing that you end up doing is going to be going through this filter in your head, thinking, well, how useful is that? Do I really need it? What could I possibly improvise with that? And is there something better out there which may be working better for me in cases of emergencies? And so instead of having this sort of stuff, you end up with something like my keychain, which is something like this, which we're going to be going through in a second. But you basically have, instead of things that are just fobs with no use, you have little tools. In this case, it's a Victorinox Mini Champ, peanut lighter, LED flashlight, Phoenix LDO1, iron key, USB, tough USB, and a little pry bar. You start thinking of it this way. Basically, one of the first things people start adding to their everyday carry kit, their pocket EDC, is a knife. And you may end up with something like this. you need a knife. You start understanding that you may be needing a flashlight as well, and also a lighter. These would be the basics, at least in my opinion. I think that, of course, you should have a cell phone, wallet, your keychains, of course, but also adding a knife, a source of starting fires, a lighter, and an LED light. Now, already you may be thinking, well, this is not that good, this doesn't look very good. And of course, before I get started with more details, this is just a basic setup. It also will depend on your own location, what it is or not legal for you. Maybe you cannot have one of these knives, maybe you cannot have it in certain buildings where you may be working, so it's going to be varying. Same for a concealed carry weapon. If you can have a concealed carry weapon wherever it is that you are, that's great. But understand that this is just a basic setup, and it's going to be changing depending on what you can or cannot carry. So we already started adding something interesting here, which is a knife. A knife has countless uses, so many of them that again it would be impossible, but it is one of those tools that comes handy on a daily basis. We're talking about opening packages, we're talking about maybe cutting an apple, cutting a sandwich for eating. You use a knife basically every day for eating, every single one of us. But besides that, there's other uses for it as well. In some cases, it's used for doing repairs, for improvising stuff, even for self-defense as well. Even if you have a concealed carry weapon, having a knife may be used as an alternative secondary weapon. If your firearm jams, or if because of having someone on top of you, you cannot draw, but with your other hand you can get out your knife and use it. There's always the possibility of that happening among 1,000 other different things. You just know that a knife comes in handy. That's why most of you guys watching this video probably carry a knife as well. Now, what kind of knife is this? It's really nothing to write home about. It's not something to brag about. But yeah, much useful than having nothing at all. And that's the case for all of these things. Any of these is better than not having it at all. So yeah, if you're not going to be giving me a knife at all, but giving me this one, absolutely, I'll take this one rather than nothing. Now, if I'm going to be bothering with carrying something, if I'm of that ideology, if I have that in my mindset, then I maybe want to have something better. This is, for example, this would be a step up from that knife. Maybe not in terms of single-handed opening, which this little knife is surprisingly still good for that, in spite of not being very great. This is a knife that I actually carried for a long time when I was in school. Different times, and yeah, different times indeed. But this was the knife I carried. It is quite heavy. Take a closer look here. It is quite heavy. We're talking about brass. I mean, this was I don't want to get old and stuff, but it was a time in which single-handed knives were not still very common. So yeah, I'm getting old, man. And you have brass, but I was looking at it the other day. We're talking about a pretty solid knife. I mean, this is a huge step up from your little keychain $1 knife. It is solid. It has a nice sharp blade. It locks like very nicely. It has a little bit of wiggle, but it's understandable after all these years. And a nice size grip as well. This is a knife that is capable of doing things beyond what this little knife can do. Now, if we're starting going through this line, you may be thinking, okay, well, maybe if I'm of this idea of having the most capable tool I could possibly have, then this is kind of heavy, and maybe you would be better served with something like this. Spyderco Endura 4. We have basically the same length of blade. Of course, better steel, open single-handed. It is lighter. It is probably tougher as well. It is a big step up from that knife that was okay as it was, but there is something better. You see where I'm going here, guys? I think that each individual piece of kit should be as capable as possible. Should be as capable of doing different things as possible. With this knife, I can basically do the same things. This knife will open letters just as well as the little one. But when it comes down to maybe doing other stuff, it's maybe more capable. If I'm going to be using this knife for a barbecue, for an asado, as it's kind of common in Argentina for you to have your own knife when you go to barbecues, this is something that would work. You can actually eat food with this knife. If it comes to using it a little bit more rougher use for maybe a little bit of wilderness survival, improvising shelters, you can to some degree get by with a nice folder like this one. If it comes down to defense, you can defend yourself quite well with this one as well. Now, is there maybe something better? Well, you know, 4-inch knife, 4-inch blade, 0 tolerance, 0-300, reviewed in previous videos, it is better. It is a little bit heavier, but then again, we're talking about a thicker blade and a knife that it's basically a beast of a folder. No folder compares to a fixed blade knife. Let's get that out of the way. It is what it is. But this is a beast of a folder. This knife is going to be capable of, if it ever comes down to that, maybe there's a I mean, guys, the possibility of using knives, it's just overwhelming. There's a car accident and you have to cut a seat belt, you may be using one of these knives. Now, let's suppose there was a car accident, you're in a wreck. You have to cut off the seat belt, but you also have to pry open the door. Or there was an earthquake and you're trapped somewhere that requires prying to some degree. You're caught in a subway or in a train. I was myself caught in a subway that stopped working. If you ever have to pry a door open, I would rather have this knife than having this one. As great as the Spyderco is, I know this one is tougher because of the construction. It is a little bit heavier, but it is tougher. And it's something that it's not going to be snapping as soon as this other great knife. This is basically like the most you can get out of a 4-inch knife. You still have an excellent blade for general use. You have an outstanding knife in terms of it being used for the self-defense as well. Not only the blade, which is pretty generous in the type of wound profile it's going to be creating, pretty wide, you also have a grip that it's outstanding, has great retention. And your hand's not going to be slipping forward like it may happen here where you don't have as much of a finger guard thanks to this grove that you have here. Alright, and maybe you don't even have to go for this like top of the line 0 tolerance knife, which is, I just love it. Maybe cold steel like the new Voyagers has some of those features. If you're going to be more inclined to something that is maybe going to be used for self-defense purposes, this would be a good compromise without spending the kind of money that is required for a top of the line knife like this one. This, you still have a pretty outstanding grip as well, which has nice retention. Now, it is kind of debatable here which one is better. The steel is going to be better and the Spyderco, but when it comes down to it, you understand what I'm going for. And I have this, I am of the belief that you should have the most capable tool you could possibly carry. So instead of going with our super light but kind of not that good $1 knife, we'll throw in an expensive top of the line folder there. Okay, different uses for knives, so many of them that I just cannot cover them all, but those of you that do have a knife understand completely well what I mean by that. Let's move on. Let's go for your lighter, a source of fire, starting fires. How often do you use that? Not much, unless you're a smoker, which of course you shouldn't be because of obvious reasons, but unless you smoke, you really don't use a lighter that much. But you know what? It is one of those essential pieces of kit that you should never be without. You should never be without a way of starting a fire. Never. Because whenever it is that you need it, you're going to be needing it bad. If you've been involved in a disaster of any nature, if you need to start a fire, there's no messing around. It's not like the knife where maybe you use it for opening letters and you say, well, yes, you get more complacent. A fire, when you need to start a fire, you need it bad. And the fire is one of those things that, unfortunately, because of modern life, we've got to underappreciate to a great degree. And I'll explain why that is. Because as of today, when you think of shelter, you already have your home. And if you think of, well, I'm feeling cold, you just turn on the AC, the air conditioning and the heat, you just turn it on and that's it. If you want to prepare food, you walk into your kitchen and prepare food, and walk into a restaurant or fast food joint or whatever, and you have food right there. Those things involve fire, and it's being done in other ways. So if it ever happens that you lose your home and you are cold, the only way of staying warm is gonna be by having a fire. If you ever have to improvise and cook food on the outdoors, the only way of doing that is gonna be with a fire as well. So we're talking about essential things that we take for granted because those are problems that have been basically solved for us thanks to modern life. Then there's other cases in which just fire comes in handy when turning on certain the heaters. Some of the heater that use natural gas require a fire. When a stove needs to be turned on as well, you need fire as well. When starting a fire in a fireplace or a wood burning stove, fire as well there. Also, for example, I've used my lighter many times for melting plastic that needed to be melted for one way or another, for one reason or another. Maybe for making a repair where a plastic broke, and maybe bending it or melting it a little bit somewhat solved the problem. I think it was, yeah, it wasn't that long ago that I actually used it to melt the tip of a piece of plastic, and I'm actually going to be doing it right now. Give me a second, I'll get it, and I'll do it here for you. Well, no, it's not this exact one. I had a little plastic paintbrush like this one. I needed a Phillips screwdriver. I just melted the tip of the plastic, pressed it against the back of the Phillips screw, and surprisingly, it molded into that shape. I waited until it cooled, and I actually improvised a screwdriver thanks to having a source of fire. So you see, there's so many different possibilities, and you just cannot improvise fire any other way, at least not nearly as easily. If you have to start a bow drill to start a fire, or using a couple of sticks to start a fire, it's gonna be a nightmare in comparison to just doing this, in comparison to just, you know, instant flame. It is the kind of thing that surprises people that haven't been in contact with the modern world. I think it was in California, a Native American that had been living in the hills and only found out later on, after several decades of modern world. One of the thing that impacted him the most was matches. Actually, the way of starting fire with a match for him was just unbelievable. I imagine the poor guy starting fires with a bow drill or with primitive methods, and having something like that must have been a huge shock. Moving on and trying to keep this video, which is already getting a little bit longer, but I want to do it this way. I wanted to go through each particular thing. Let's suppose you start carrying a lighter and you say, well, yes, I'm perfectly fine with this one. Well, this isn't really that great. It's one of those cheap lighters that cost half a buck or so. And there's nothing wrong with big lighters. Bigs are actually good quality, but again, go on with me in this philosophy of having the most capable tool there is. Maybe a better lighter would be something like this, like the one I've reviewed previously for here, the Modern Survivalist, the Clipper lighter. Is it better? Yes, it is. Simply because, well, not only can you see how much fluid you have in there, you can also recharge it. It is a rechargeable lighter, and you have the possibility of replacing the flint there, which I don't know if you guys know, but this could be used as a little, for doing little, it's actually sold. One of the pieces of kit sold as a fire starter is something very similar to just this alone. You could use it that way if you run out of fuel in there. Okay, The materials here are also better. There's again, I did the proper video on it. I think it takes like 3 minutes before the plastic here melts in comparison to a cheaper lighter where it would melt much faster. If you ever have to improvise and use this for finding your way, again, one other use of a lighter, finding your way around a dark corridor, like it happened to people in Bosnia during the Bosnian War. The people in Sarajevo were saying that a lighter was in fact a very valuable and cherished possession, and people that could actually refuel the lighters, they were even doing it with disposable lighters through the main valve over there, was something that was certainly appreciated. A lighter is one of the things you just want to have. Maybe instead of going for something like this, you go for something like a Zippo lighter. But then again, a Zippo lighter has the disadvantage of fuel running out pretty fast. I think that if you want to go that route, a better alternative is the IMCO lighter, which I've again talked about many times before. The IMCO lighter lasts at least twice as much and has that beautiful feature of being used, if you do it properly. This one is probably run out of. It can be used as a candle as well, or even as a burner. If you have enough fuel for it, yeah. There's nothing gonna be burning or breaking there. So it is a step up, in my opinion. It is a step up from the average Zippo. Then again, the beauty of lighters, of gas lighters, is that they just never run out. The fuel doesn't dry up, so that's certainly an advantage. Maybe it's the best option, something like this, something like the Jeep lighter, which in this case I have a bit of Gorilla Tape wrapped around it, which again does come in handy every once in a while. A good lighter is definitely part of your kit. Finally, let's move on to the flashlight. Flashlight, I find that lots of people do not think that it's that necessary. And again, maybe it's because of past experiences shaping the way I think and such. I've been way too much time without electricity because of different blackouts during different times. I mean, it's a childhood thing, remembering all the blackouts and candles being used for lighting. Then later on, after the crisis as well, blackouts became common as well again. And basically every winter, the grid goes down very often, and you're left in the dark more more frequently than anyone would like. You start appreciating a lighter, a flashlight. And in this case, it is a cheap little Columbia advertising product kind of light. You see what happens when you have these kind of things. For example, the power is not good. It's not reliable, as you saw there. It just turns on dim, then it works better. It is because you're going for a cheapo product. And sometimes you pay very little and you get a great product. In general, you pay for what you get. So instead of going for something like this, you may go for something like this, which is a huge step up. And size difference is not that big, guys. Really not that huge. And we're talking here not only about a flashlight that is reliable and such. We're talking about one that is capable of putting a lot of lumens out the front. 200 lumens out the front. This is the 4/7 Quark Mini 1 through 3 classic flashlight. Yes, it does use an expensive battery, but you know what? I think it's worth it. We have low, medium, high. We have all those capabilities that are found in modern good flashlights. Why is it that you should have one of these? Well, not only because of blackouts. You may be thinking, power never goes down where I live. I really don't need that. On a daily basis, you end up using a flashlight. At least I end up using it a lot. Whenever you have to look into something, it's some dark corner, something dropped under the table, checking out the power counter at night, or just moving around after dark. I have a friend of mine that used to say, you have, out of the 24 hours a day, half of those are basically nights. So it makes a lot of sense to have a flashlight. And he is right. We take for granted the artificial light that is provided by the modern world. When that fails, you are caught by surprise. One flashlight such as this one is not only a big step up because we're talking about having more power, we're talking about having more capabilities as well. You have low, medium, and high mode, and that means that if the blackout, maybe if you, for example, if there's an instant where there's an earthquake, and you understand that the power you have, the juice you have in your battery has to last for several days, maybe even a full week or so, the power you have is limited. In that case, you can make good use of it by using the low modes and getting much more runtime from your flashlight. And you don't have that choice here in this type of flashlight. Then you have the strobe mode, and the strobe mode in all these flashlights that have different modes, generally you find low, medium, high, strobe mode, SOS and such. You may be thinking, I'm never going to be using the strobe mode in my flashlight. I really don't need that. Well, you know what? Sometimes you do. It happened to me in Barcelona visiting my parents. We had a problem with our car. We had to get out of the car and walk back home. And you know what? In the middle of the highway at night, it was pretty scary knowing that the people driving by could not see us clearly. But thankfully, because I had a flashlight, I actually had that one as well. So I had two flashlights. One of them having the strobe mode actually made it better for making ourselves notice in the middle of the dark highway. That could happen basically to anyone. Car accident at night could happen to anyone, and having that possibility of making yourself notice may just save the day. Indeed, may just save the day. Maybe if we start looking off, well, what is it that I could have even better than this? I think that something like this is a step up, and there's thousands. These are just examples of what I'm talking about, guys. All right, there's several different products, brands, and such. This is just an example. A flashlight with a clicky function is, at least in my opinion, more handy than the twist user interface. The twist mode is very reliable, but this starts getting into the field of tactical flashlight applications, and here we're adding something else to what the flashlight is capable of doing, which is the use for defensive purposes. On the maximum output mode, this flashlight goes up to 300 lumens, actually pretty powerful for such a small flashlight. And you see the size difference is not really that big. I mean, yes, you have a little bit of a bigger flashlight here. It is a little bit bigger, just a little bit more weight, but you know, I don't find it that inconvenient. If I'm going to be carrying one flashlight, having this one and having this one, the size matter is not that much of a problem for me. I much rather have the extra functions, the extra capabilities of this type of light rather than just having the slightly smaller one. For someone that it's maybe there's an issue with someone breaking into your place, a home intruder, this flashlight is powerful enough, and the user interface, having the clicky button that back there, is good enough that you can actually use it as a tactical flashlight. It has that ability. Why not have it? Why not go for something that has that option? Let's go back to some natural disaster, a mudslide, an earthquake, whatever happened. You're caught in a collapsed building. You just weren't able to make it out of there, and you're caught in under tons of concrete, like it happened to the folks in during 9/11 when the towers were brought down. You're caught there. You're still alive, but you cannot move. Maybe having something like this saves your life. Maybe having something like this, you just put it into a strobe mode and you leave it there until they find you. You know what? Because of the type of materials, concrete does reflect nicely light. So there's actually a pretty good chance that even if buried under tons of concrete, if you have a few openings and you put this light into that opening, signaling yourself, you leave it like that, maybe someone sees the light and actually finds you. Any case in which you are left hopeless and you don't have any other way of signaling, a flashlight is indeed very valuable. There was this case of And you know, I keep going to tangents here, guys, and I'm sorry, but I just want to bring these points as home as possible. There was this family in Argentina. They were driving from one town to the other. They had a car accident, went off the road, crashed into overgrown grass and bush, and they were so wounded that they couldn't make their way out of there. But they were so unlucky that they crashed into this overgrown bush, and no one found them. They started looking for this family. There was lots of theories. They looked for them for days, and I think it was months after the actual accident that they found them. They simply didn't have. I think a couple of them died immediately in the car accident. I think that the wife was able to drag herself. Yeah, I mean, it's creepy, but she dragged herself, extremely wounded. She dragged herself to check on her kids. I think they were dead. She dragged herself to her husband, who was seriously wounded, couldn't move at all. But at least one of them survived for days. Survived for days and died of exposure because they couldn't be found. And something like this would have saved their lives. Isn't that incredible? Even something like this. Maybe, I mean, I'm thinking, my head is working. I'm wounded, I cannot move. Maybe I can move maybe an arm. You just see here, maybe you hear them, you hear people looking for you, but you don't have any way. Maybe you just get off a shoe, or you approach the car and you light it up. Maybe burn a tire so as to make a smoke signal. You have options, you have possibilities. That's always what you want to have during emergencies and disasters, and also on a daily basis as well. Why not? All right. Finally, and at least I think that it's part of what you should have at all times, a multi-tool. For some people, they're not that much into it and they think it's not essential. I think it is an essential part of your pocket EDC, a multi-tool. Now, again, what kind of multi-tool are we carrying? The smallest, cheapest little one that we can find? It may come in handy. It may be enough, or it may not. Why go for something like this, which is what? Ultra Fire, like $3 multi-tool. It is not spring loaded. It is not that great. The materials are not good. For basically the same size or smaller and just a little bit more of money, you can actually have a proper little multi-tool like this one. Leatherman Squirt PS4. Good construction, good materials. It is spring loaded. You have tools that actually work. You have all this thing comes loose. You have a blade that, unlike this one, this is pretty much useless. And right now I'm thinking of that movie 127 Hours, I think it's called. That guy, that hiker that got caught into while hiking, he got his arm caught between the wall, the side of a hill, of the cliff, and a rock, and he didn't even have a multi-tool to cut off his arm. He didn't have a proper blade. He had one of those. He says it's one of those cheap multi-tools that you get for free when you buy a flashlight, and it had such a bad dull blade that he couldn't even cut off his own arm. You know, maybe having a proper knife and a proper big fixed blade, maybe he could have chopped through that thing. Now here we're going for the smallest multi-tool we could possibly find, and this is, in my opinion, keychain territory. I wouldn't want to go with this as my multi-tool. Why go with this when I know perfectly well that something bigger, better is more capable of doing different stuff? I would go for, at the very least, something that is full size, something like this. Leatherman Sidekick. We're talking about something so much better. We have proper pliers. One of the times I actually needed a multi-tool bad was when the screen sweeps, the windshield sweepers of my car came loose in the middle of the road. It was raining, and I actually needed that to work. And I actually had this one. I had the Leatherman Charge TTI, which for very little money, talking about basically the same wideness of pliers, so this one would have worked as well in that case. This it was just big enough to fit into that nut that needed to be tightened for the windshield sweeper to work. A smaller multi-tool would not have worked. It would not. It was just not big enough. This was barely big enough to get the job done. So again, why go for the thing that is just not as good as the real deal? I just don't see it. I just don't understand it. You have the Sidekick, which is a great tool for the money. You have the Wave as well, a little bit more expensive, but better, more options in there. And a multi-tool, just, I mean, there's so much things that you can actually do with these things. It's ridiculous. A multi-tool for fixing stuff, for improvising and building other things as well. You have the saw in there for maybe if you need to build shelter, cut a few branches and improvise a shelter. Doing car repairs, you have actually a file that it would be good enough so as to file down something that needs to be repaired as well. You have extra blades in there. You have seatbelt cutters here in the Charge TTI. So thinking of a car accident, you actually have your seatbelt cutter right there. How neat is that? Finally, trying to wrap this up, the keychain. The keychain for me is a backup to all this. I have a backup blade and tools. I have a backup flashlight, which actually has a AAA battery as well, which is more easily available. I have a backup lighter that has an O-ring that keeps the fuel in there for a longer time. And I have, of course, important files in a secure USB drive, the Iron Key. And a little pry bar. Where is that? A little pry bar so as to spare the tip of my knives if I ever have to use it for prying. Right? Not as great for prying as a big nice knife like this one, a big chunk of a knife like this one, but in some cases it does come in handy, and it's small enough that it does make sense, at least for me. Guys, as always, I hope you enjoy my videos. Remember to subscribe because there's going to be more stuff coming up for you. Have a great day. See you on our next video.